It was a perfect day at the playground. Peppa and George, along with their friends Rebecca and Richard, were having the time of their lives, their laughter echoing through the sunny air as they played on the swings and slide. Suddenly, an unsettling silence descended. The other children and their parents had vanished, leaving only Peppa and her friends. The sky subtly darkened, and the vibrant colors of the playground seemed to fade. The swings began to sway gently, as if an unseen hand pushed them. A faint, distorted whisper, chillingly like a child's voice, drifted on the air, sending shivers down their spines. The bright yellow slide, once so inviting, was now marred with dark, sticky-looking streaks. Rebecca Rabbit pointed at it, her eyes wide with fear, a silent question in her gaze. Richard Rabbit clutched his beloved teddy bear, seeking comfort. For a fleeting moment, the teddy bear's eyes glowed a malevolent red, then returned to normal, unnoticed by the frightened little rabbit. A close-up on the sandbox revealed an unsettling sight. The sand began to shift and form small, eerie mounds, as if something unseen was stirring beneath its surface. The merry-go-round, once a source of joy, began to spin slowly on its own, gaining speed with each rotation, emitting a chilling creaking and groaning sound that filled the silent playground. The swings now swung wildly, almost violently, their chains groaning under the strain. The distorted whispers intensified, merging into a cacophony of multiple children crying, a sound of pure despair. At the edge of the desolate playground, a dark, shadowy figure, vaguely childlike in form, flickered into view, then vanished behind a gnarled tree, leaving only a lingering sense of dread. The ground beneath the children's feet began to crack, and faint, glowing purple lines appeared, spreading outwards like a sinister web, trapping them in an unseen embrace. The slide, once innocent, now oozed a thick, black liquid from its dark streaks. It dripped onto the cracked ground, sizzling faintly, a horrifying testament to the playground's transformation. The sandbox mounds grew larger, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. Small, skeletal hands, formed from the very sand, briefly emerged, reaching out, then quickly retracted, leaving only ripples. The merry-go-round spun at an impossible speed, blurring into a dark, swirling vortex. The children, their faces pale with terror, clutched each other, their small bodies trembling. The shadowy figure reappeared, closer now, its eyes glowing with an intense, malevolent purple light. A wide, unsettling grin stretched across its indistinct face, a chilling promise of what was to come. The glowing purple lines on the ground rose up, forming a shimmering, inescapable cage around the terrified children. They screamed, but their voices were stolen, their cries muffled by the oppressive silence. The figure extended a hand towards the trapped children, and a faint, shimmering purple mist emanated from its palm, slowly drifting towards them, a silent, ominous cloud. The mist enveloped the children, their outlines blurring, then fading completely until they were gone, absorbed into the ethereal purple haze. The playground returned to its bright, cheerful state, as if the horror had never occurred. The sun shone, birds sang, the swings were still, and the slide was clean. There was no sign of the children. Near the sandbox, a single, small, muddy footprint was visible. It was unmistakably Peppa's size, a lone remnant of their presence. The footprint slowly, eerily, sank into the sand, as if being absorbed by the earth. Peppa Pig's house at night, with a single light on in Peppa's bedroom window. The moon is full and casting long shadows. Peppa is in her bed, eyes wide open, looking scared. A faint, unsettling sound is coming from outside her window. A close-up of Peppa's window, showing a distorted shadow of something tall and thin passing by. Peppa slowly gets out of bed, her eyes fixed on the window. The unsettling sound grows slightly louder. Peppa tiptoes to the window, pulling back the curtain slightly. Her face is filled with dread. Outside, a shadowy figure with glowing eyes is standing in the garden, looking directly at Peppa's window. Peppa gasps and quickly lets go of the curtain, backing away from the window. Peppa runs to her parents' bedroom, her small figure silhouetted against the moonlight from the hallway. Peppa tries to wake Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig, who are sleeping soundly. A loud thud comes from downstairs. Peppa's eyes widen in terror. Peppa looks back at her parents, who are still asleep. She knows she has to investigate. Peppa slowly descends the stairs, each step creaking ominously. The living room is dark, but a faint, eerie glow emanates from the kitchen. Peppa cautiously approaches the kitchen doorway. Inside the kitchen, the shadowy figure from the garden is now standing by the refrigerator, its back to Peppa. The figure slowly turns its head, revealing a distorted, unsettling version of Daddy Pig's face with glowing red eyes. Peppa screams and turns to run, but the figure is suddenly right in front of her. Peppa wakes up in her bed, gasping for air. It was all a dream. Peppa looks around her room, relieved. The sun is now shining through her window. Peppa gets out of bed and goes to the window, looking out at the peaceful garden. Suddenly, she sees a faint, distorted shadow pass by the window, just like in her dream. Peppa's eyes widen in fear again. Was it really a dream? A close-up of the garden, showing a single, unsettling red eye peeking from behind a bush. Peppa slowly backs away from the window, her face pale. The final shot is of Peppa's house, but the light in her bedroom window is now off, and the house looks even more ominous than before. It was a beautiful morning at Peppa Pig's house. Peppa and George, as always, were enjoying playing in their favorite garden. But something was in the air, barely perceptible yet unsettling. Peppa, George, did you see that? George, quiet, oink. Something caught Peppa's attention, something that made her freeze and listen. The bushes rustled, though there was no wind. They stared directly at Peppa and George. A cold fear ran through their small bodies. This was something they had never seen before. Peppa, run, George, faster. Fear paralyzed them. Every step was difficult. The shadows around them grew longer and darker, like living creatures. A shadow covered them. It was huge and ominous. Peppa and George's hearts pounded. They felt a chilling breath on their necks. Peppa, Mummy, Daddy. They ran without looking back. The house, their safe haven, was so close. But would they make it in time? Mummy Pig. What was that? They were safe, but only for a moment. The horror they brought with them was now inside the house. Daddy Pig. It's here. The creature was at their doorstep. The shadow covered the entire house. No one could hide from its presence. George, Peppa, I'm scared. The house shook from the impacts. The creature was trying to get in. The Peppa Pig family was trapped. The door was opening, slowly with an ominous creak. The light emanating from behind it was unearthly. What awaited them on the other side? It entered. Its form was distorted. Its eyes glowed in the darkness. The air filled with the scent of something alien and ancient. It was here, in their house, in their living room. There was no hope left, only fear. Peppa, please. Her plea was just a whisper in the ensuing silence. The creature was approaching. The end was near. Darkness consumed her. The world stood still. Only silence remained, foreshadowing something even more terrible. The house was empty. Only the echo of horror remained within its walls. What happened to the Peppa Pig family? The world had changed. It became a reflection of the horror that visited their home. There was no hope. The only thing left of George, his favorite toy, a symbol of lost innocence. The house, once full of laughter, was now just an empty shell, a reminder of what had happened. The end, or just the beginning? Some stories never end. They just wait for their time. Sometimes, even in the most innocent places, something hides that can change everything forever. Be careful, for not all fairy tales have a happy ending. It was a dark and stormy night. Peppa and George were inside, safe and warm, or so they thought. George, the rain is very loud tonight, whimpers softly, clutching his dinosaur. The wind howled, and the trees outside swayed like skeletal fingers. A strange feeling hung in the air. Peppa, George, time for bed. Mummy, I don't like this storm. Nonsense, my little piggy. Storms are just nature's lullaby. But Mummy Pig's voice sounded different, deeper, and her eyes held an unfamiliar gleam. Now close your eyes and dream of muddy puddles. Whispering George, did you hear that? Muffled whimpers. The sound grew louder, a wet, sucking noise, as if something was moving through thick mud. Gasp softly. The mud spreads across the floor, forming grotesque, swirling patterns. It seems to pulse with a life of its own. George is now fully awake, trembling. The muddy puddles were not outside anymore. They were coming inside. Dee Dee Dinosaur, Peppa and George huddled together on Peppa's bed, which is now an island in the spreading mud. The mud is almost up to the bed frame. We need Daddy Pig. The mud continues to rise. Strange, shadowy forms begin to emerge from its depths, vaguely resembling distorted pig faces. The puddles were alive, and they were not friendly. Daddy Pig. The silence was more terrifying than any scream. A close-up of Peppa's face. Her usual cheerful expression is replaced by pure terror. A single tear rolls down her cheek, reflecting the green glow. Whimpering, I want my mummy and daddy. The mud forms a large, swirling vortex in the center of the room. The distorted faces are now swirling within it, their forms becoming more defined, more menacing. The muddy puddles were calling to them. A shadowy, elongated hand, seemingly made of mud, reaches out from the vortex towards Peppa and George. Screams, a small, terrified sound. Peppa pulls George closer, shielding him. Her eyes are fixed on the approaching muddy hand. No, the muddy hand retreats slightly, as if hesitant. The vortex continues to swirl, its green glow intensifying. But even in the darkest moments, a glimmer of hope can appear. A faint, almost imperceptible light appears from under the bedroom door, pushing back against the mud. What's that? The light grows stronger, revealing Daddy Pig's silhouette in the doorway. He is holding a very bright, ordinary flashlight. The mud recoils from the light. Peppa? George? What's all this fuss about? The mud rapidly recedes, shrinking back under the door and disappearing. The room returns to its normal, comforting appearance. The night light is on again. The light, simple and pure, banished the darkness. Mummy Pig enters, looking her normal, cheerful self. She yawns. What's going on? Did I hear something? Peppa and George are hugging Daddy Pig. They look relieved but still a little shaken. The room is completely normal. There was mud, Daddy, and scary faces. Chuckles, you must have been dreaming. My little ones, just a bad dream. The family is back in bed, sleeping peacefully. The storm outside has calmed. The moon peeks through the clouds. A tiny, almost invisible speck of sickly green mud remains under the bedroom door. Or was it? Fade to black. A faint, squelching sound is heard, then silence. The end, for now. Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. The familiar laughter of Peppa Pig and her family echoed through the house, but a subtle chill had begun to creep into their cozy home. It started with the shadows, stretching longer and darker than usual, twisting into unsettling shapes in the corners of their eyes. Peppa noticed it first, a fleeting glimpse of something in the hallway, a figure that wasn't quite Daddy Pig, its silhouette too tall, too gaunt. She blinked, and it was gone, replaced by the comforting, if slightly snoring, form of her father. George, usually so boisterous, became unusually quiet, his eyes wide as he stared at seemingly empty spaces. Mummy Pig dismissed it as childish imagination, but even she felt a prickle of unease when the teacups rattled on their own, or when a faint, mournful whisper seemed to drift from the attic. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the lights flickered, plunging the room into near darkness. When they came back on, the vibrant colors of their home seemed muted, drained. The food on their plates, usually so appealing, now looked strangely unappetizing, almost gray. Daddy Pig, attempting to lighten the mood, told a silly joke, but his laughter sounded hollow, and a cold draft swept through the room, despite all windows being closed. Peppa and George huddled closer, their small hands clutching each other. The air grew heavy, thick with an unspoken presence. A faint scratching sound began, coming from within the walls, a rhythmic, insistent scrape that grew louder with each passing second. It wasn't the sound of mice. It was something larger, something with purpose. The scratching intensified, moving from the living room to the kitchen, then up the stairs. The family froze, their eyes darting nervously. Suddenly, scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. It was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning when Peppa and George woke up in their bedroom. The sun was shining through the curtains, and everything seemed normal. But something felt different today. As they went downstairs for breakfast, Mummy Pig was standing completely still in the kitchen, staring at the wall with an unnaturally wide smile. Her eyes seemed to follow them as they moved, but her head never turned. Daddy Pig sat reading his newspaper, but the pages were completely blank. George tugged on Peppa's dress and pointed to his dinosaur toy. The small green creature now had tiny sharp teeth that gleamed in the morning light. Its plastic eyes had turned completely black, and it seemed to be watching them. The family decided to visit Grandpa Pig's farm, but the journey felt endless. The familiar countryside looked wrong somehow. The trees were too tall, their branches reaching down like grasping fingers. When they arrived at the farm, Grandpa Pig was nowhere to be found. His house stood empty, with all the doors and windows wide open. The animals in the farmyard had gathered in a perfect circle, all facing inward, completely motionless. Peppa called out for Grandpa Pig, but her voice echoed back strangely. George began to cry, but no tears came from his eyes. They discovered that all the vegetables in Grandpa Pig's garden had grown into impossible shapes. Carrots twisted into spirals that hurt to look at, and potatoes had sprouted eyes that blinked slowly. The family tried to leave, but their car wouldn't start. The engine made sounds like distant screaming, and the radio played only static. Night began to fall, though it seemed far too early for darkness. The stars appeared in patterns that spelled out words in a script that made their eyes water to read. They decided to spend the night in Grandpa Pig's house, but every room they entered was exactly the same as the last one they had left. In the living room, the television turned on by itself, showing episodes of their own lives, but everything was slightly wrong. The Peppa on the screen turned to look directly at them. George's dinosaur toy began to grow larger, its plastic becoming flesh, its roar becoming real. It spoke in George's voice, but the words were all wrong. As the night wore on, they realized they were not alone in the house. Footsteps could be heard from upstairs, slow and deliberate. The morning never came. The clock in the kitchen ticked backwards, and the windows showed only endless darkness outside. Peppa looked in the mirror and saw her reflection smile back at her, but she wasn't smiling. Finally, they heard Grandpa Pig's voice calling from somewhere in the house, but it was coming from all directions at once. There were 5 chairs around the table instead of 4. The 5th chair was occupied by someone who looked exactly like Peppa, but her eyes were completely black. The other Peppa stood up slowly and walked toward them. She opened her mouth to speak, and when she did, it was with the voices of everyone they had ever known. Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. It was a perfectly ordinary morning in Peppa's house, or so it seemed. Peppa woke up in her bedroom, but something felt different. The walls appeared to be breathing slowly, expanding and contracting like living tissue. She rubbed her eyes, thinking it was just her imagination, but the movement continued. Downstairs, Mummy Pig was making breakfast, but her smile seemed too wide, stretching beyond what should be possible. Her eyes never blinked as she stirred the porridge in perfect, mechanical circles. When Peppa entered the kitchen, Mummy Pig's head turned a full 180 degrees to face her, the smile never wavering. George was already at the table, but he wasn't playing with his dinosaur as usual. Instead, he sat perfectly still, staring at his bowl with unnatural intensity. When Peppa looked closer, she noticed that George's reflection in the spoon showed a completely different expression, one of pure terror, silently screaming. Daddy Pig emerged from behind his newspaper, but the pages were blank except for a single sentence repeated over and over. "They are watching you." His glasses reflected not the room around them, but endless corridors that seemed to stretch into darkness. The family decided to visit Grandpa Pig's farm, but the journey felt impossibly long. The same trees passed by the car window again and again, as if they were driving in circles. The radio played the same cheerful tune on repeat, but the melody began to distort, becoming slower and more sinister. At the farm, the animals were all facing the same direction, standing perfectly motionless. Their eyes had turned completely black, and they moved in perfect synchronization when they walked. Grandpa Pig greeted them with his usual warmth, but his shadow moved independently, waving when he was still. In the garden, Peppa found her favorite mud puddle, but the water was darker than usual, almost black. When she looked into it, instead of her own reflection, she saw countless other Peppas looking back, all with slightly different expressions of growing fear. The sky began to change color, shifting from blue to a sickly green, then to deep purple. The sun remained in the same position, but its light grew dimmer and colder. Birds flew in perfect geometric patterns, their songs replaced by an eerie humming. As evening approached, the family returned home, but the house had changed. Rooms led to different places than before, and hallways stretched longer than they should. The stairs creaked with voices whispering names that no one recognized. When bedtime came, Peppa climbed into her bed, but the ceiling above her had become transparent. Through it, she could see infinite layers of identical bedrooms, each with another Peppa lying in bed, all looking up at her. The last thing she heard before everything went dark was the sound of all the other Peppas whispering in unison. "You're not the real one,